Is 7 full board or you have open spots?
We're one of the full boards, so all 7 of our positions.
Because it seemed like from what I had seen, most of the boards are looking for people. So.
Yeah, well, we're the fun moving and shaking.
Yeah.
So we got people wanting to be.
People want to do parts.
I'll take a look downstairs.
Okay.
And it would get up the elevator.
Okay, so am I supposed to stand up as a camera?
That is a camera.
Take that one, the signs on the elevator. It said, go to the south elevator. And I'm like, this is the south, but Aaron was pointing that way. So I went down there to the south elevator, to the north elevator, and it said, go to the south elevator.
It's fuck my signs then.
Well, they worked, it just, you know.
Charming.
We had a method to our madness.
We did.
If you can follow directions indirectly, get up here.
And it's like all these emails I've been sending them about courts, I've got north and south mixed up.
All I know is not to the west.
Yeah, you can tell where the sun's divided.
I just only saw one elevator. I was like, I don't know if there's another elevator that's further south or if this is the south.
We need to label
Yeah,
elevator 1 and elevator 2.
thing 1 and thing
Thing
2.
I think either one would work.
You've only got 2 options.
I think we'll be twist because I swear I'm on the right side of the building and then the elevator pops up on the left side of the building.
I don't see anybody on here now.
Yeah.
Sure. Testing 1 and 3.
You reach and
No.
Testing. 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 Yeah, I hear you. Okay.
That's a free summer concert series in the state. Los Alamos Summer Concert Series is back every Friday night this summer.
Okay, yeah, that's- So do I need my microphone?
Ready?
Oh, no, you can hear it from over there.
All right, so 5:34, we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order now that we have a quorum. And I'll go ahead and special meeting, we'll just go ahead and open up the floor to Director Styron for the integrated master plan findings and discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for those that are joining us by Zoom this evening. We're pretty excited to be bringing back to the group for your thoughts and observations about our survey data. So this is a summary of the survey findings that we did back in May. They've been collaborated, tabulated, and evaluated with our RC associates. We have Lucy Harbor here, who's with our RC, but probably more importantly, she's a member of our community. So she lives in White Rock, so she has she gets to see this, and then she also she has an understanding of our community. So she's gonna go through the slides. Again, these were from the survey. She'll share that data. Just to let the board and the public know, this is just one piece of information that'll be used as they start to develop the recommendations of the findings. They'll use this tomorrow night's information from the level of service and condition assessment. And then we're gonna pull our ADA audit finding results in there. So as we're beginning to develop our recommendations, we'll use all three of those pieces as well as public feedback from tonight and tomorrow night to kind of cobble together the recommendations for hopefully some programs and services that we'll move forward with and kind of guide the department for the next 7 to 10 years. So with that, turn it over to Lucy. She'll guide us through. And then just let us know how you want to answer questions at the end or as they come up, or just.
As they come up, maybe put them in the chat. My coworker's monitoring that, and then we can kind of conglomerate them at the end, maybe.
If you guys have any questions, please raise your hand and we'll answer those from here.
Yeah, so as Corey said, my name is Lucy Harbor. I work for a company called RRC Associates down there in the bottom left. And I do happen to live in this community. I actually live in Los Alamos now. My fiance and I bought a house on Bronco Mesa in February. So pretty new member of this community, and working on this project has nothing to do with me living in Los Alamos. It's just a happy coincidence. So we work closely with Barry Dunn, and they typically contract out to us for the survey research on their master plan projects because that is our area of expertise. So I'm trained as a social scientist and I specialize in parks, recreation, and tourism community research. And with that, go to the next slide. It's just a table of contents of what we're going to go through today. So I'll introduce the project, talk about the methods, and then go through the results of the survey. Next. All right, so the purpose of this study, as you know, is to gather community feedback on the Los Alamos County Community Services Department as part of both of this integrated community services master plan and also that ADA audit and transition process. So as everyone on board knows, but maybe not everyone in the audience, the community services department includes libraries, parks and recreation, the ice rink, the aquatics, golf divisions, as well as all those social and cultural services. And so this survey was designed specifically to assist in integrating the community's needs and desires into the development of those plans. So as Corey said, this is just one part, understanding the community's point of view, but that will also be integrated with other findings that Barry Dunn has put together and that you'll hear more about tomorrow night. All right, so just a little background on the research methods we used here. So as you know, it's usually not possible or practical to try to speak to every single member of the community. And so survey research is designed to estimate what the community thinks from a subset or a sample of that population. And so as we know, error is always present. We aren't talking to every single person, but we use sampling methods that are designed to minimize that error as much as possible. So a common target for survey research is a margin of error of plus or minus 5%. And in this case, for our invitation or statistically valid survey, we got 911 responses from the community, which puts our margin of error at plus or minus 3.2%, which means that overall we are really confident in these results, that they are both reliable and that they represent the sentiment of Los Alamos County residents. And so what we did is a standard process. We mailed out a postcard, in this case, to every single residential address. Usually in a larger community, we would pick a random subset, but because it is a smaller community, we were able to use an entire mailing list and send one postcard to every address. So every single household in Los Alamos County was invited to submit one response. And then, you know, this is our statistically valid sample that, as I was saying, really has a statistically representative view of the community, but we also always provide an opened up survey as well. Anyone can then have the opportunity to make their voice heard And it's also a nice benchmark comparison. So when we look at those two samples side by side, it's two different subsets of the community. And we see that they're very similar, which is another validation of our results. But there are some differences, and so I will highlight those as we go through this. We've kept that data separate, those people that were part of the statistically valid sample, and then those additional people. So that was opened up to anyone who wanted to respond. So that could be non-county residents like commuters, residents of nearby communities like Hispaniola who might come up to use CSD services, as well as households that wanted to submit more than one response. And so our full response was, that's the other. I don't know what happened.
Yeah, sorry, we're trying to get it to share through Zoom.
Oh, okay.
Let me,
Because the one difference between the later slides and these slides is that the sample size was incorrect on the first slides.
sorry.
No worries. And then just as a data treatment, we weighted those invite sample by age, gender, and ethnicity to ensure the appropriate that it was a representative sample. And so what we do, that's a very standard survey process. There were certain groups that we know were underrepresented in the responses versus their prevalence within the county. And so that it's weighted to more appropriately represent who Los Alamos County residents are. And yeah. So first I will talk about the sample demographics. Slide. All right, so overall, we found that residents or respondents to the survey have a relatively long tenure in Los Alamos, which we know is pretty common in this community. One thing you can see there is that the open link respondents have lived in the community on average for less time, but also keep in mind that the invite sample was weighted by age, although in this case, the results skewed a little bit older, and so we weighted it down a little bit. And so most respondents to the open link sample as well did live in Los Alamos County. Again, it was open up to anyone who wanted to participate. 5% of respondents to the open link survey lived outside of Los Alamos County, so we asked them about what their connection was to Los Alamos to kind of figure out why they were taking the survey or what their interest is. And so as you can see, there were only 15 of them. But many of them traveled to Los Alamos to use the CSD facilities and services, which we know to be true because it is a draw for nearby communities. Slide. So one thing that we wanted to cross-check was where in Los Alamos County residents live, because there is a sentiment that there are some differences between residents of Los Alamos and White Rock. As you can see here, the survey responses were about 30% from White Rock and 70% from Los Alamos, which is very close to the actual population estimate, which is great to see. And then, as I mentioned, the invitation sample was weighted by gender and age to better reflect the community profile. And so you can see the gender identity and the age spread there. So we got a lot of, not very many responses from residents under 25, but a good spread across the rest. And the sample is also weighted by race and ethnicity. And so in the original sample, we were seeing a little bit less of a response from Hispanic or Latino residents versus what the true population is here. And as I recall, the White Rock sample was a little bit higher percentage Hispanic Latino than the Los Alamos sample. And as you can see, mostly white respondents. And then in terms of household makeup, couples with children at home was the most prevalent category, and you can see that's particularly strong in that open link sample. And so that's one thing that sort of has driven, I think, a lot of the differences in results between the invite and the open link is that the open link sample obviously circulated around families with children. And so you can see a little bit of that influence on those results. But as you can see, the survey, it really does represent a variety of different types of households. And the next slide just shows ages and presence of children in the household. So the open link sample again was more likely to have children in the household and a slightly higher total household number of residents. And all of these demographics, I haven't shown any comparisons between White Rock and Los Alamos because they were all very similar between each other. And then just, no surprise here, respondents are relatively affluent with about 30% of both samples earning $100,000 to $150,000 a year in household income. And then a couple additional questions. As you can see, most people do own their residence, although looking at the difference between White Rock and Los Alamos had a higher share of renters. I think it was about 15% versus 2% in White Rock, which is, you know, probably reflective of where there actually are rental units. Most people are registered voters and about half have a dog, which is less than I think Corey told me. Corey said you had to have a dog to move to Los Alamos.
What it felt like.
All right, so you can go to the next slide. So these questions, now that we've gotten through who's represented in the sample, I'll tell you a little bit about what they said. So we asked them whether or not they or anyone in their household, and that's a key point to make here, is that many of these questions are asking about your entire household, not you personally, because we do want to find out about the entire household, of course. So they were asked whether or not they or members of their household use any of the following services. And so as you can see, more than 3/4 of all households use the top 5 that are listed there. So parks and open spaces, trails, cultural and historical programs and services, and libraries and activities and programs are highly used. And then very few, so less than 10% have used those bottom 2, so mental health services and financial assistance programs. And some key differences between the invite and the open link sample are put in this box here. So as you can see, and keep in mind that the open link sample, as we said, had more families with children. They also were more likely to say that they use ball fields and courts, and the ice rink, which you'll see comes up as kind of a theme throughout the open link data. And then I think the next slide shows differences between White Rock and Los Alamos. So as you might expect, there are some differences in use between White Rock and Los Alamos. In some of these facilities that there is only one in the county. So, you know, there's a 10 percentage point difference in use of the aquatic center by Los Alamos residents versus White Rock residents. Same with the stables. But there are also things like the ice rink and the golf course that there is also only one in the county, and the use is very similar. So that doesn't always indicate that the location within the county is driving use. It's also down to interest and what the draw is of that facility. And so then an open-ended question after asking which of these do you currently use, asked if there was a reason that the household hasn't used any of the above, to kind of gauge whether it was just lack of interest or it doesn't apply to my household situation. But some of the themes that come up again in those comments are limited hours of operations, which I know has been impacted by COVID-19, the cost of using those facilities or services, access issues for the mobility impaired, and just communication or awareness of those. So those are some of the top themes that we saw in analyzing those open-ended comments. Okay, so the next question asked, what would assist you in members of your household in using facilities or services? And the biggest thing here that came out is improved communication about offerings. And that was another key finding. Later when we get to the information about communication, I think that is something that would help a lot of people. And as you can see, it's pretty spread out in terms of this list of things that were offered in terms of options. But there wasn't as strong, or like, you know, none of these had a majority, but improved communication was definitely the top there. And then just looking at differences between White Rock and Los Alamos, I won't get into all these on the presentation, but this data is being provided to the master plan team. And so it just shows that there might be some differences between the two communities in terms of, you know, if Los Alamos residents are almost twice as likely to say better signage and wayfinding, that might indicate that where we need more signage and wayfinding is specific more to Los Alamos. And clearly, it's not much of a surprise that White Rock residents are more likely to say that facilities closer to where they live or work would help. But again, that's a very small share, only 14%. All right, so they next were asked how important each of the following facilities are to their household. And there was a lengthy list, 24 facilities or services were listed. And everything in the top within those brackets had a rating of 3 or higher. So that was 14 out of the 24 categories. And this is on a 5-point scale where 1 is not at all important, 5 is very important. So the top 14 were somewhat important or more. Parks and open spaces, trails, library services, cultural and historical programs and services, and the aquatic center were those top ones there. And parks and rec, parks and open spaces, trails and library, those all had ratings over 4. And those are consistent across both samples and throughout. That's a common thing that you'll see in the rest of this data. So those are highly important to households. And then the least important down at the bottom, pickleball courts, mental and physical health services, those are still, sorry, now we're at the next, we're at the needs on that one. No, that's okay. Yeah, just go back one. Sorry. All I was gonna say is that even though these bottom ones, you know, there's a ranking, an average ranking below 3, we still have 15 to 17% of people responding to the survey saying that those are important to them. And so what that really shows is that for all of these facilities and services out of 24 listed, you know, 1 in 7 residents find them pretty important. And so, you know, they're all important to people, but different ones are important to different shares of the population. And they're pretty similar between the 2 samples. So then after asking them how important are they, we next ask, are they currently meeting your needs? And so as you see, you can go to the next one now. Sorry, I can't see the screen. I thought I would be able to. Library services, trails, parks and open spaces, those are all highly rated in terms of how their needs are being met. So those are the top ones from the previous slide in terms of what's most important to one's household. And they're also rated really highly in terms of how they're currently doing. In fact, overall, most facilities and services listed here are really meeting the community's needs. You can see that they're all an average rating higher than 3 out of 5, and half of them have an average rating of 4 or above. And so there are very few facilities and services that on average people feel are not currently meeting the needs. But some of those bottom ones include mental and physical health services for families, for youth, tweens, teens, and pickleball courts, which were also lower on the importance scale. And just one noticeable difference here is between the open link and the invite is the importance of the ice rink. And so you can see, where's that one? Oh, I'm sorry, that was on the importance slide. Yeah, if you went back one. Just pointing out that the invite sample had a slightly, the open link sample had a slightly higher weight put on the ice rink. And in terms of meeting the needs, the average ratings between White Rock and Los Alamos are pretty similar. I think there's one more slide after that. They are very similar. The 3 categories that I put a box around are the ones where there's a difference greater than 0.1. And so in most cases, that's the Los Alamos residents' needs are on average more highly met. Although when it comes to camping and RV parking, the average rating for White Rock residents, their needs are more highly met. And so what we do with these 2 questions, right? So we're looking at how important are these facilities and services, and are they currently meeting needs? And so we can put them into a matrix where we kind of categorize them as items where they're really important and their needs are highly met. And so these are priorities because they are very important to a lot of respondents, but needs are already currently adequately being met, so they are less of a priority when it comes to the long-term improvement plan. Things that we really are focusing on are things that are highly important, but currently not meeting the community's needs. So these are key areas for potential improvements and are the most sort of important when it comes to targeting those improvements. And then, of course, we can look at areas where the needs are not being highly met right now, but they're also of, on average, low importance. And then items that are, their needs are highly being met, but they're not that important to a lot of the community. And so as we think about those, that can help us with prioritizing the types of changes that we're putting into the master plan. So next slide. So objectively, all facilities and services are meeting the community's needs. As I said, they were all above a 3.0. So if we plot this as, 3 out of 5, 3 out of 5, everything is falling into those two right quadrants. But if you go to the next slide and we look at the average ratings, then we can see those comparative areas of strength and weakness. So we can see which ones are below average and above average, even though, as we already said, everything is doing really well. And so I'll just kind of go into what is falling into those quadrants on the next few slides. So this area is high importance, low needs met. So those are the ones that are really the key areas to target for improvement, because a lot of the community cares about them and they're currently doing less to meet the needs of the household. So those are the aquatic center, activities and programs for families, mental and physical health services for seniors, activities and programs for youth, tweens, and teens, and mental and physical health services for families. And then these 7 fall into high importance to households, but also highly are currently being met. And so these are important to respondents and obviously should be maintained, but they're less of a priority when it comes to improvements because they're currently meeting the needs. And so that comes with many of the most highly rated ones: parks and open spaces, trails, library services, cultural and historical, library programs, activities and programs for seniors, and playgrounds and play sets. So these ones, these 7 facilities and services are highly currently meeting people's needs, but they're of less importance. So thinking about what types of resources are going towards these and whether that's an appropriate amount might be a constructive discussion or something to think about in the master plan. And those include the ice rink, rectangular sports fields, shooting range, tennis courts, golf course, diamond-shaped sports fields, arena, rodeo grounds, and/or stables. And then finally, these 6 facilities or programs are of low importance and currently below average in terms of meeting the needs of people. So we think of those as ones that have a small but passionate following. And so they are things that we might think about improving, but thinking about the level of participation in terms of where that falls for planning for the future. And that includes mental and physical health services for youth, tweens, and teens, camping and RV parking, other sport courts, disc golf, pickleball courts, and then the category that was in other where people could write something else in. And then when people were asked why facilities and services were not meeting their needs, these are just some of the themes that came up. So not enough camping, campsites or RV parking, looking for improvements to the ice rink, field and trail maintenance, pickleball, and the aquatic center were some of those top themes that came up in those comments. And those comments will be included in the data that we give over. All right, so after asking about the existing facilities, amenities, and programs, then we turn to future priorities. And so the question read, we have identified areas of improvement for Los Alamos County over the next 5 to 10 years. As we plan for the future, please help us prioritize by letting us know which potential changes to facilities, amenities, programs, and services are most important to you and members of your household. So first, they were given a long list of facility and amenity priorities and asked to pick the top 5. So the percentages that you're seeing here are the percentage of respondents who included that within their top 5. So they weren't just picking one. And so as you can see, half of the invite sample picked additional trails and bike paths as one of their top 5 priorities. And 41% included additional trail signage and maps. And below that, there was a lot of spread between all the other additional ones. And then those differences that kind of stick out in the open link sample, the orange bars, you're seeing upgraded ice rink and additional ice rink or derby rink. So it is possible that this link was emailed around to an ice hockey team or the youth ice league, or because there are a lot of families. And so, we see this a lot in our data where an interest group gets the link to the survey. And so that is also why we keep these two samples separate. These are obviously, there's a passionate following who cared enough about that to come take the survey. But we also keep that separate from the invitation sample that shows the representative data that reflects the full population. And then the next slide here shows differences between Los Alamos and White Rock. And there are some differences. I won't go into those in detail, but these data will be helpful in terms of, like I mentioned earlier, knowing if there are people that want, additional picnic and shade shelters, if there's a difference between where those are desired, or where different residents are desiring those things. And so there are some places where there are differences that could really be helpful, I think. And so they were asked to choose their top 5 facilities and amenities, and then also here their top 5 programs and services priorities. So again, these percentages show the percent of respondents that included that within their top 5. And so physical health programs and services for everyone, and mental health programs and services for everyone rose to the top there. The open link again was very similar. If you go to the next slide, we'll see differences between Los Alamos and White Rock, which I won't get into, but that data is helpful as a lens again for looking at where those different priorities lie within the county. So next we get to communication. There is an entire section of this on the survey, which is pretty standard on our Parks and Recreation survey, but this is very helpful here, I think, because that kind of rose as one of the key findings is communication being something that is an area of improvement. So early on in the survey, we asked, how familiar are you with CSD opportunities? And the familiarity varies here. So, the average was 3.4, but you're seeing there, what is that? 22% gave a 1 or a 2. So saying that they're not really familiar. And, only 15% said, yes, I'm very familiar with what the CSD does. And then later on in the survey, you can go to the next slide, we asked about the effectiveness of communication. So how would you rate the availability of information and communication about CSD opportunities, including facilities, services, programs? So again, this is where it's helpful to look at the spread of the responses instead of just the average. So the average was 3 out of 5, but we're seeing a fair chunk of people rating it below 3, but also a fair chunk of people rating it above 3. And so there are definitely pockets of the community that don't know a lot or don't think that the communication is effective, but there are definitely people who are in the know. And one thing we did also, just another note on that slide, we looked at it by age group. And so we see that the rating about communication is definitely correlated to age. So younger respondents are rating communication as less effective. Older respondents are rating it as more effective. So that might indicate a need to think about, what communication channels are being used, who those audiences are, and ways to target younger population. And whether that's through channels or just expanding your distribution lists. And those results were very similar between Los Alamos and White Rock. So I didn't include that in the slides. And so in addition to rating, or to asking how would you rate the communication, we're asking how do you currently find out about CSD facilities and services. So as you can see, more than half of people use word of mouth. That's how they're currently finding out about it. Local media and the Los Alamos County website are also pretty highly ranked. And the open link sample, which again was younger, including more families, they have a higher incidence of currently finding out about CSD on social media. So 45%, that was the second highest current communication method. And so in addition to asking, how do you currently find out, we asked, how would you like to find out, or what would be your preferred method of communication? So that's on the next slide. And we see that email is the highest, although none of these categories had an overwhelming majority, so it's kind of spread. But if you look at, email being the top sort of preferred method of communication, Compared to the previous slide, only 11% of people are currently finding out via email, but 27% of people say that would be their top way. So thinking about how to just get more people on those email lists and keyed into the email resources would be, sort of some low hanging fruit there. And then one thing that really stuck out to me is that only 2% of people or 1% of the invite said that word of mouth is their preferred way of communication, but more than half of people, that's how they're finding out. So they would like to be finding out through more official channels, but they're not. So, they're currently finding out just because they hear about it from other people, but they would like to be finding out about it through email, media, the website, social media. And then again, here, open link, we're seeing more people choosing social media as their most preferred communication. And then this is another breakdown by age that I mentioned earlier. So as you can see, when you look at the different sort of age ranges, there are differences in preferred methods of communication. So this could be helpful in terms of figuring out where to expand those different communication channels. So there was also a question about funding. And so you can see here that grants and private foundations are heavily favored as sort of the preferred way of funding those priority future needs when it comes to figuring out how to pay for those things that people said that they want. And there is pretty low support for things like development land dedications, new local options, gross receipts tax, those ones at the bottom. And it seems like this was less of an important question when it came to this process or where we are in the process right now, but it's good to have that data. All right, so then at the end of the survey, there was just an open box for comments. Anything else you want to tell us about LAC-CSD? And so these are just some of those themes that came up when we look at them. Open space, which as you saw came up a lot in terms of use and importance. Those trails and open spaces are highly important to a lot of residents. The website, involving more community input, some negative comments about the golf course, and a desire for a movie theater, which as I understand is happening now. So maybe shows a little bit of time lag here for this data. Next slide. So I just have a couple sort of summarizing this onslaught of data that I just delivered. So differences between those two samples, the open link respondents or the people who, the survey that was open to anyone who wanted to take it was comparatively taken by more families with children, by more women, and or also renters. And so those are just things to keep in mind when looking at the differences between the results. Familiarity with the community services department is pretty widespread. So some people are familiar with it. A lot of people are not familiar with what the CSD department, what CSD is or what it offers. And so there's definitely some room for improvement when it comes to communication about opportunities. A lot of people, more than 90% have used parks and open spaces, really high use of trails, cultural and historical programs and services, and libraries. Not surprising at all, knowing this community. And relatively few respondents have used the mental health services or financial assistance programs that are available through CSD. Parks and open spaces, trails, library services are the most important facilities when people are asked about what is important to their household. And they're also really highly rated in terms of how needs are being met. So we're doing a really great job in those areas. When it comes to areas for improvement, and those are those facilities and amenities that are higher in average importance and lower in average needs met, include mental and physical health services for families and for seniors, activities and programs for youth, tweens, teens, and seniors, and also the aquatic center. And so those two address sort of current facilities and amenities. When it comes to future desires, when it comes to whether that's improving current things or building new things, additional trails and bike paths, additional trail signage and maps, additional picnic and shade shelters, better maintenance of all those existing facilities, and upgrades to Camp May were the top 5. And then when it comes to programs and services, the top 5 are physical and mental health programs and services, special events, cultural programs and services, and childcare. So I think that is about all I have. I know we've got probably some questions in the chat, questions from the board, so I don't know how we want to handle that.
I'll open it up to the board first. Any questions, comments?
I have a question.
Sure.
I saw that one of the things that ranked highest for target for improvements was the aquatic center. Yet, the leisure pool's not open. So how do you, account for if it was open, would you even make the cut as far as needing improvements?
Yeah, and one thing we can do is look at some comments too, because I know that the aquatic center was a theme in those comments. And so seeing what specifically about the aquatic center people are saying. Off the top of my head, I think hours of operation and some accessibility issues were what I remember seeing from the comments, and that's something we could dig into a little deeper. But it is true. I mean, this is reflective of one point in time. And so people took the survey in, I want to say it was April and May, mostly May. And so that reflects, what was available at that point in time. And there's nothing we can really do about that. But I think those comments would provide a little bit more detail.
And just to follow up with her, a lot of the comments, we've got 72 pages of written comments, and there was a large percentage of them wanting extended hours, particularly on the weekends at the aquatic center. Was, as she said, a pretty big theme there.
And since people can't identify who's talking, can you just say your name before you guys make a comment?
Any other?
Chris Olson, Parks and Rec. I had a question sort of specific. There were two amenities that changed title a little bit. One is additional RV parking and storage, and there was one that was like camping and RV parking or something like that. It sort of got phrased 2 different ways
Okay.
in the thing. And I guess the RV parking, I feel like you captured your target audience for that because it's Los Alamos residents who own an RV, they want to go park it. But the camping and like the need for an RV park and stuff like that, the Los Alamos residents, like, I don't need to camp. I have a home here. Is there, and it feels like from my sort of uneducated observation that RV, like having an RV park is a very critical need. You look at the White Rock Visitor Center.
Right.
It's like and people are parking at Camp May, and people park at our little, but those I'm assuming are non-Los Alamos County residents. Is there a way of sort of like incorporating that?
Yeah, that was something I was thinking about too, just, having recently moved here and been looking for housing. I know that a lot of people are using that as a temporary housing situation, and those people are less likely to have been invited to take the survey or known about the survey. I do think that in some places in the survey, we were talking about, upgrades to Camp May specifically, and there are people who live in Los Alamos and are using that as a resource.
Yeah.
But you're right, that was kind of an area of nuance when it comes to, do people want to store their RV here when they're not using it, or are they looking to use their RV somewhere here that has hookups like what you're talking about at White Rock? So that's a good question. I would like to look back at the data a little bit more and see if we can figure something out. And that's something that's, that's what's great about like setup of these meetings too. Like it's great to know what's important to you, and there are always ways we can kind of dig into the data and like look at it differently and look at it between the 2 different types of respondents or where they live. So see if I can tease anything out there.
Thank you.
I had one question, Trey Pineda, Parks and Rec Board. I had one in regards to the mental health services. So on the use of the facilities and services, it says mental health services were one of the lowest, second to last actually. But then on the importance, and they listed it at an average of a 3, and then needs being met again at a 3. Did the data show anything about why it would be ranked so high as far as needs being met and importance when there's such little use behind it?
Yeah, I think one thing that I would like to look at specifically there is the sample size, because what's happening is that, first we ask, does your house currently use this? A lot of houses are saying, no, we're not really using this. But they think that those are important things to have, or they're important to their household to have mental and, mental health support for their families, but they're not necessarily currently using them. If you are, a couple without children, or, seniors whose children are gone, your household needs or importance are not really, that's not really applicable to you. And so there are people, those are not included in the average, but if someone says NA, I don't have any, teens in my house, so this doesn't apply to me, they're taken out. So one thing to look at would be how many people are actually responding to that question, and if we have, enough of a sample to make a strong sort of conclusion from that. But yeah, I think there's a nuance between, I think you have people that say in the comments, I think this is really important. Our community needs mental health services for teens, but my household isn't using that because I don't have any teens. So I think there's a little bit of a difference there. And also what's shown in these slides is just an average. And so one thing you saw earlier, you might have 40% saying 3, but there's still, groups of people that are above and below that. And so seeing that breakdown, which is something we provided in the final report that we gave to Very Dunn, just seeing those, how that distribution is, I think could tease that out a little too.
And then that's another one that in the comments, a lot of people don't know that we offer services like that. I was really shocked to see how many people, I didn't know you had that. Another one that came up was people were amazed about the little theaters.
Yeah.
Found out about that. That one came up.
I want to say Little Theater and Step Up Gallery. People were like, what is that? I didn't know that existed.
And right behind that was mental health services, and it just, so maybe there was a large population that just, yeah, we should be having that. Don't use it because it isn't that.
Yeah, and if you think about the progression of the survey, first it's like, does your house use any of these things? And they're like, no, I didn't know that existed. I don't use that. And then the next thing is like, is this important? And it's like, yeah, that is important. And so just seeing, that a lot of people were not aware of these, and that gets back to sort of the familiarity and communication. I think in some cases, it's not even about improving them or providing more of them. It's just getting the word out.
Any other comments? Questions?
Darren Meadows, Parks and Rec, one more question. How is gym space captured? The need for additional gym space? I see it looks like a little bit kind of buried other sport boards, basketball, volleyball. Was that the extent of trying to capture improvements for possibly a new gym?
I want to say that was in one of the future priority lists, and I don't have it in front of me actually. I want to say like there was something, maybe it was, Corey, was it in the follow-up questions, which I didn't include in this presentation?
Well,
there was something about like using open space at LAPS.
I know there's a question about additional courts, basketball, volleyball, but I don't think there was one about specific gym space. There was another comment about additional open space or other items.
Because I remember when we were first designing the survey and we were kind of, we had some really long lists and we're deciding what to include. I remember talking about a gym, and I want to say there was in the current use question, there were some follow-ups that were like, where do you currently do these things? And there was like, so we've identified like what percentage of people are currently using space at public schools, but that doesn't really address the need, the future need.
The basketball court issue is dealt with in the inventory, among other places.
Okay.
I'm not sure it deals with the gym question.
Yeah, I guess my comment there is if this is going to feed a master plan, lack of gym space has been for quite a while, and I would hope it would be necessarily left off because it wasn't covered to the extent it could be here.
Yeah, and that's another area where we could look at the comments. I don't remember that seeing that come up. But for all of these questions, it's like, how important are these things? There was always a write-in box, and so that's somewhere where like the need for a movie theater, I remember seeing coming up a lot in the comments. That was never addressed in a survey, but a lot of people were writing in like, we need a movie theater. And so I think we would have seen that. There's always the opportunity to write in another. That doesn't mean that if we had included on the list, it wouldn't have been higher than what we're currently seeing people write in comments for. But I could definitely look in and see, dig into that question a little.
I just wonder if perhaps the reason the gyms weren't even considered, and perhaps Director Styron can give a little bit more, is the majority of gym space is owned by LAPS. If I'm not mistaken, is that correct? Director Styron, is maybe that why it was left off the survey, since they're owned by the schools?
Yes, Mr. Chair, and then again, as part of the question on the future facilities and amenities, under new facilities and amenities, there were multi-use community spaces, which was what we kept hearing during the focus group, something that could be an athletic event, but could be used for a meeting or a performance. So based on the information from the focus groups, we tried to broadband it a little bit. So we didn't specifically ask for additional gym space. We try to couch it in that multi-use community space conversation.
I kind of, with that, want to kind of branch off the question. So with that, when this survey was taking place, was the other reason, because what Chamisa, there's another gym down in White Rock that's being attached to Chamisa that has been funded. And then the discussion of the middle school gym joint use project is also out there, and we're pretty sure will most likely get funded. Has that been discussed in any of the comments? I haven't read through all of them as partial solution to some of the gym space issues.
I do not recall a significant amount of comments regarding gym space. There were a few, but I don't remember a significant. And I think some of that will also come out in the level of service tomorrow night that shows capacity and stuff like that. So I think that'll also talk about what we have versus what we don't have in national, compared to national standards.
Any other questions, comments from board members?
Chris Olson, Parks and Rec. And maybe this sort of comes back to something that you, Director Styron, have touched on as comments, but one of the things, like when in the matrix of like high, high sports type of needs met, in specific, something to trails and all sort of represent open space is part of this question. I could definitely see where a respondent would say, oh yeah, trails are super important to me, and wow, we've got a really great trail system. So that's meeting my needs by having this great trail system. But the other thing that, at least some of the feedback that I've seen, social media, that kind of thing, through OSAS, is wow, we also need a lot. We need to expand trails in areas. We definitely need a lot of more trail maintenance. There's things need to be done there. So I guess I'm assuming that's just that's the third factor that comes into where things sort of end up in the priority list from a.
Yeah, and in that, the slide that shows like where people could pick their top 5. Mm-hmm. So there were just a ton of options on that list. And so, if people were gonna give an average ranking for each thing, that might rank pretty highly, but it didn't make their top 5. And so that's what, where we've got, and the way it looked on the survey, there were sort of groups. So it was like, focusing on things that we already have, creating more of them, maintaining them more, or completely new things you could add, like more gym space or, a BMX track or things like that. And so it's possible that those just aren't rising in people's top 5. Although I do remember beginner mountain bike trails, I think was pretty highly ranked.
Under the top 5 facilities and amenities priorities, where you get to check your top 5, additional trails on bike paths was the #1 that had over 50% of the respondents. On the invite sample, wanted that. Additional trail signage and maps was the second highest item. Additional picnic and shade shelters. Number 4 was better maintenance of existing parks and recreational facilities, and number 5 was upgrades to Camp May. So I think while people see that as important, it is meeting their needs. There
There are more things
are more
related
things
to
we can
that.
do to make them user friendly. Yeah. Or improve the user experience.
Yeah, so in reality, I think the data is like telling the exact story that you just said of like people think they're great and it's really important, but there's a lot we could do to sort of in that space.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments from board members? Okay, so we'll open up for public comments, questions.
So Jamie Aslan, oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
Oh.
Jamie Aslan has a question.
Oh, member Aslan. Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry, we cannot see. We can't see the participant.
Okay. Jamie asked, was there any education as part of this to the participants of how the golf course hosts fundraising events that bring in thousands of dollars to local nonprofits?
There was nothing associated with the survey itself. I don't know about other, promotion that may have happened. And with the survey process, we usually just put it out into the community. They're hearing about things through local media and whatever their interest groups are, but we usually don't include any sort of education because we don't want to sway the responses in any way to alert people of topics they might not have known about ahead of time. And so it's really just, a snapshot of right now, what do people know about and what do they think?
And we, to build on that, we also did couching these questions with, hey, this could be an economic impact, or this could be a tourism destination. We really wanted to focus on what our community and those that frequent here, because we know that Lanham has a huge impact from not only day use, but there's a high degree of those that use the teen center, the tween center, the library. So we wanted to try to really focus on what was important for our community, and if it, oh, by the way, it does something else, then we're okay with it. But it was really about what's the community.
Yeah, so I'll say there's not any sort of priming on any specific special topics, but what I think this brings up, I don't know much about that specific issue, but, if we're seeing that there's some negativity around resource use in the golf course, maybe people really don't know what else the golf course is contributing in the community. So that's an opportunity to sort of put some education out around that to sort of counterbalance that.
So Jamie just added, the reason he asked is the perceptions from the participants that don't reflect the educated priorities.
Well, what this is telling us is what residents currently think. And so we can do with that what we want to do with that.
Can we promote member Aslan's to panelists?
Right now.
Second, awesome.
So David Teeter on there also.
Yeah. I did too. While they're promoting the other two board members onto the panelists, I'll open it up for public comment, and then we'll circle back to the board members for another round as they get promoted. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'd like to know, my name is Sherry Evans Carmichael. And I'd like to know, because I noticed several times on here, you say trails and bike paths. Can you tell me what kinds of trails they're talking about? Because historically, most all of our trails have been multi-use.
Right.
And how is that different from bike paths? And how are they going to decide what areas, what trails need to be worked on first? And I mean, because like I've been out here, I've been here for over 30 years, and I have never seen, other than one time, and that was UCC, the YCC, that they were out there actively working on trails around the stable areas. And they've just about cut the stables off from the trails because they're not being maintained. And so I'd like to know a little bit more about what trails and how that's different from bike paths.
Yeah, and I think that's something that wasn't addressed. I mean, it just clearly wasn't addressed specifically in this survey. And I think partly it was already a very long survey that was covering a lot of sort of broad topics and not really digging in really specifically into, you know, some of these sort of user conflict questions. I know that there were times where it was talking about trails and bike paths and then specifically like mountain biking trails. But I don't know that there was a lot on the survey specifically about, besides there's some general questions about trail maintenance and you know, we saw those rise as priorities, but this was a very sort of 30,000 foot view survey. And so we didn't dig into those specific, you know, the only way we would know about community input specifically about specific trails was if someone wrote a comment. But I think this was sort of to determine high level priorities from the community. And I think when it comes to sort of the inventory that the level of service analysis brought up, then they're looking more at specific sort of trails and resources. If that makes sense. I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
But there's several trailheads mentioned in the level of service, but you're right, we didn't go into detail about, is it a specific hiking path issue? Is it a biking issue? Is it an equestrian issue? We just didn't go into those details.
Because we do whole like research studies just on multi-use trails or, you know, user conflict between equestrians, cyclists, hikers, but that just wasn't this, you know, the level of detail of this project.
Well, how are you going to address those issues? Because they have been issues over the years. And just since I've been out there at the stables, which is many years now, approaching 20. And the area is not, I mean, what we did is we rewrote, and I don't know if this board has seen it, but we did a vision statement that was tied into Los Alamos County vision statement. And it included cultural and historic parts to the stable area. And I don't think most people are aware of that. And we had two buildings out there that are historic, the Lujan and the Grant log cabins. And, you know, there are a lot of people out there that would like to see the educational part of the cultural and the historical area out there. I mean, there's a lot of cool stuff we could do, but it's just not getting any interest from people who are making decisions. And, you know, there's a lot of people who are upset about that.
Well, that's the number one reason why we're undertaking this effort. We have those issues. This is Corey Stein, Director of Community Services. We know there are issues all around the county from a variety of items, from stables to athletic fields. And what has not happened is for us to look at it and say, what are the most important things to look at? How can we game plan that? And then what additional efforts do we need to make that happen? The desire, I can tell you from this, and I've talked with staff, is once we get this done, there's going to be action plans made off of this that we'll either do additional research if we need to, or come up with some plans to attack these areas and start these improvements so that we've got a direction to move. But it's got to be based on priorities of the community. It's really tough to continue some of the one-offs that we've been involved with over time. So this will give us a focus, give us some direction, and between this data, the data we get tomorrow night with the condition assessment and level of service, and the ADA accessibility audit, all of those things are going to be put into this final recommendations that will come up, and they'll come back to this board, they'll go to council, there'll be another opportunity for the public to weigh in on those and help us refine that list so that we can get a good working list that we can drive us for the next 7 to 10 years. And it'll be hopefully it's by community priority, and everybody knows that you're either number 1 or you're number 12, and if somebody else wants to come in, this board or council will get to say, okay, well, you know what? Yeah, they're kind of right. You need to move this one up to number 1, and you're gonna move down to number 2, but we just don't have anything from a department level that drives that at this point.
Have you even seen the vision statement that the folks out there at the stables came up with?
I've seen comp plans, I've seen open space plans. I haven't seen a stable management plan because I know Wendy's working on that. But that's part of our challenge, is because everybody has a desire on what they want or thinks important. And yes, it's important to that group, but there may be 6 people over here and there's 80 over here. Or honestly, I'll tell you what's happened just based on my research. If somebody finally gets mad and gets a group of people and we dedicate all of our resources to solving that problem, when in the whole county scheme of things, it was probably a number 10.
And why does that happen?
I can't tell you, that was BC before Corey. But that's what we want to do now, is get these things on the radar, get them listed. The community knows, hey, here's our top 10 for the next 2 years, top 20, whatever it is. Advocate for funding, and we move forward, and we got a game plan that you guys know what's next on the list.
I think it's really easy for, and we see this a lot when we compare the 2 different samples when we do these surveys, is you see that an interest group can, rally their people to respond to a survey or make a lot of noise, but the invitation sample data that we have, I mean, we got a really good response rate. We are really confident that represents accurately the feelings of, residents of Los Alamos County. And so, it's just a hard truth that things have a priority order in terms of how people, value them.
I'd like to make a comment. Okay. Is that okay? My name is Liam O'Neill, and I am a USA Pickleball Ambassador, okay? And I want to say I'm very thankful. It's very professional what you've done here. And observation I make is I've been in this area about a year and a half, and I've done everything. I've ridden the trails, I've played all your courts, I've done it all. Okay, so the bike trails, I agree, they're very important. My wife rides her bike every day. There's one paved trail that she can ride on. Okay, and she was not going to ride on a dirt paved. So that's important to her, and I voted for that. And but what I would like to point out is that in your top 5, it's health and mental health programs for adults or for anybody. Okay, so if you come to Los Alamos and you say, well, what am I going to do? Where can I get involved in a team sport or something that when people of my age? Okay, the fact that you don't have an indoor gym that's public, that's open to the public, all the other cities have an indoor gym in this area. Okay, and that's where they have multi-use and all that. So you got that one in White Rock, that's great. Okay, pickleball can be played in an indoor gym. Okay, but the point is the top priority is people want something to do. If you come to Los Alamos, what can you do as an adult? What can you do? Well, you can do the trails because they're here. Okay, the pickleball facilities, the assessment will probably come out tomorrow. We don't really have any. Okay, so but when the timing of the survey, when the survey came out, a lot of people didn't know what pickleball was. Okay, and I got involved with the paper, or wrote an article, and it went out, and I started getting all these phone calls. So our pickleball community has grown from 25 people to 50 people that are actively playing in the area with no facility. So it is a small interest group, but it is the fastest growing sport in the US. So I think it has working with Wendy, that some of the things have multiple purposes, like shade. One of the things that was high was people want more shade and picnic tables. Well, I'm trying to get Wendy to put a shade cover over a bench on a pickleball court, on a tennis court, so you can sit down for a minute in the shade. You know, some of the things that rank high overlap. But I think it's very good. More spaces, more shady places to play, more things to do for health, mental health and fitness. So that covers a lot of stuff. I want to appreciate what you've done. I think you got a good program. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I will say that this survey is a snapshot in time. And so, I think it's really helpful for our, the master plan process, but awareness and popularity of different sports comes and goes. But you make a good point that there are, different, there are those overlapping sort of goals.
And again, it is a snapshot, and world events play a major role in this too. I was in a community a number of years ago, and we really didn't think about it, but we did our survey like 2 months after the Olympics, and everybody wanted badminton, they wanted archery. Some of those highly televised cool sports that nobody thinks about for the other 3.5 years. And those things popped up, and we're scratching our head going, what happened? And then one of the consultants said, well, I wonder if the Olympics influenced this. And sure enough, we were able to find some data that was. So it's not perfect, but again, it gives us a game plan for 5 to 7 years. And hopefully in that 5 to 7 year window, we come back and say, here's all the great things we've done. What are the next? What's the next shuffle of priorities, and what are the next trends out there? And that's the piece that will go into this too that I didn't talk about. Like, what are the emerging trends will be discussed in that master plan as well, to be fed into all that information. So again, this is just one piece of info for that document. Was anybody else online that had a?
So we promoted David Teeter and Jamie, so we can unmute them and they can ask their questions. If
Okay.
you'd like.
Please.
Jamie? He's unmuted. His microphone's not moving though. We can't hear you, Jamie. Technical issues with Jamie.
Does Member
But
Teeter have anything?
David, I asked him. There it goes.
I put something in the chat, but it was back relative back to the bike trail discussion. And I was curious if the question distinguished between the community's use of bike trails for recreation purposes and or for alternative means of transportation. Because I think the solution to that might be different depending on how somebody answered that question. Could you hear me? Okay.
This is for you. No, we didn't. We did not designate between recreational or transportation on this particular survey.
Okay. Thank you.
Member Aslan, did you have, were you able to unmute? And do you have any additional questions?
He's unmuted, but we still can't hear him. No additional questions and he can't unmute. So he is unmuted.
Okay.
Something on his.
Okay.
Okay. Do we have any additional public comment for individuals who are on Zoom?
I'm not seeing any hands raised or any Q&As popping up.
Any follow-ups from anyone here?
Oh, wait, now I got hands.
Okay. The Zoom meeting.
Zoom delay.
Great.
All right, Lawrence Tickner. You should be able to talk. You just have to unmute yourself.
Thank you. I've been having computer problems, so I'm coming in and out. At the beginning of the presentation, I believe you said that postcards were sent to everybody in I don't know the wording, every household in Los Alamos.
Yep.
And then you said it was a random sample. And I think you're mistaken there if you send a postcard to everybody in the community and then you have a self-selected sample because the people that wanted to reply did reply. I think you may have some statistics problems in that it's not a random sample, it's a self-selected sample of the community. How that affects the results, I don't know for sure, but
Yeah, no, I mean, that's every single survey. You can't force someone to respond. In what I said was that in most communities, we would do a random sample, it would be a subset. But in this community, it was small enough that we could invite everyone. But the method is the same, which is that every single resident in Los Alamos has the same chance of being invited to take the survey as any other resident. And that's all we can do because you cannot force someone. I mean, even if we call people's houses and try to talk to them, if you don't want to answer a survey, you're not going to answer a survey. But in terms of the opportunity to participate in the public comment process, every single resident had the same chance of being asked to participate.
and I think it can skew your results because you have a select number of people who decided to respond from the postcard. So I'm not convinced it's as solid a survey as you would say. So I guess we can disagree there, but I think you.
Yeah, I mean that's how social research works. We we know that people who feel strongly, whether positively or negatively, are more likely to respond. But we made every effort to reach out to every household in the community, and the survey was promoted in terms of the importance and the purpose of it, and that's how social research works. And we're using the best methods that are out there, and they're backed by science. So.
Okay,
Or any,
thank you for your.
is there additional
Yes.
public comment online?
Yes. Dana?
Yes, can you hear me? Can you
Yes,
guys
ma'am.
hear me? Oh, great, thank you. This is Dina Bessenson. Thank you for the presentation and for doing the survey. I really appreciate that effort, and I do realize it has a lot of difficulties in it, but it's a good way forward. I did want to just highlight exactly the same thing that Mr. O'Neill said regarding the overlap between a lot of the existing services and the fact that they actually do rank in the activities for teens, the activities for families, the activities for retired people that were ranked so high but not high on the satisfaction and basically are higher priorities. Then I'm hoping that when this goes forward, that the fact that something is an existing facility will also move an item up on the list versus a new improvement thing. So for example, we already have an ice rink. We already have some sort of a BMX track spot. So I'm hoping things like that, because they're existing and already do some things, at least in the case of the ice rink, that they would be moved up from just the pure points alone, rather than they be considered as more important because they're existing and they already satisfy other parts of the survey. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other?
That is it.
Okay, well. You write it down.
I actually had a question regarding the timeline on all of this, Corey. If you could give us a high level, how do you see this turning in from where we're at today to, I guess, the master plan where feed?
So more than likely, we'll have the public comments from this one. We'll get public comments tomorrow night. You guys will see on August 11th, the ADA summary and survey data. We'll get thoughts from that. All that data will be combined along with the trends analysis, put together in a package. So I'm probably September, October, to come back with recommendations. I can verify that with Barry Dunn, but maybe late September, early October, come back with the recommendations that we can poke holes in, and then try to get your recommendation and the council recommendation before the end of the year, so we can have it for budgeting purposes of 2023, 2024.
Thank you. Any other board members online? All right, so, do we need a break or do we want to push forward?
Mr. Chair, this is the only item tonight.
Oh, okay.
I thought there might be some more conversation and questions. Still with about 90 minutes on this, so that's, we got good feedback, good conversation with people. Just to remind the people that are listening, this was the only item tonight, was the summary of findings. Tomorrow night is the regular Parks and Rec Board meeting with there'll be a presentation on artificial turf fields. There'll be a presentation on the current level of service and condition assessment of our existing facilities, which will be a piece that goes in here. And then there'll be a presentation on the golf course improvements phase 2. And just to clarify, phase 2 for those that are playing along, that is the conversation about improving the driving range and modifications on holes 1, 2, and 3. There'll be a brief overview of where they're at on phase 1, which to summarize is greens, tees, bunkers on holes 4 through 18 for tomorrow night. And again, please participate. If you know somebody that missed this meeting, we'll repeat this presentation next week on the 20th, or if you want to come back again and have some more questions. And then we'll do the level of service next Thursday on the 21st again for those that may have conflicts in the community, so give you a couple opportunities. We've also recorded this, so sometime tomorrow or Friday it'll be online if you want to go back and review it, check the notes and all those good things. This is, from my point, this is really important for our community to give us some direction and some priorities, help our staff move forward. And I thank RC for the presentation. Thank the board for taking the time to go through it. And back to you, Mr. Chair.
No, I think with that, then that will cover it. On behalf of Parks and Rec Board, we thank you for the presentation. We thank the public for their constant and continuous input to help make the community better. If there's no objection, we can adjourn this meeting. All right, we're adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.